us as black women, Paige reminds me a lot of you. Like, you say you're not really about me. And she knows how her privilege has gotten her to that point. And also, like, she's good at basketball, obviously. But, like, she understands her privilege. It's like what pushes her over the top, in a sense. It reminds me a lot of you.
A'ja Wilson is no stranger to the spotlight. As one of the most dominant forces in the WNBA, Wilson has stirred the pot in more ways than one. Wilson didn't just sit quietly after her team's unexpected playoff exit. She spoke out boldly about what she believes is a much bigger issue plaguing the league: poor ratings and racial dynamics in women's basketball. And in her candid words, Caitlin Clark, the rising college basketball star, found herself caught in the crosshairs. But before we proceed further, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. Wilson's frustration wasn't just about losing the playoffs, it was more profound. It tapped into the ongoing conversation about why the WNBA has struggled to capture a wider audience compared to its male counterparts. While Wilson, this isn't just a problem of lack of viewership, but also a reflection of how race factors into the way players are perceived and celebrated. She pointed to Caitlin Clark, a young and talented player with a huge following, as a catalyst for this conversation. Caitlin Clark has become a sensation in college basketball, known for her sharpshooting, flashy plays, and undeniable charisma. Her rise has been meteoric, and her popularity has often been compared to that of NBA stars. But Wilson, with her keen awareness of the media landscape, raised an eyebrow at how quickly Clark has become a household name, suggesting that race plays a role in her heightened attention. The implication isn't that Clark isn't talented, far from it, but that her popularity might have a lot to do with how media and fans are more willing to embrace her, because she fits a different narrative, one that centers on a white athlete in a predominantly black league. This isn't a new conversation in sports. The idea that race plays into how players are marketed, talked about, or even judged on the court is a recurring theme that's been discussed by athletes for decades. Wilson's comments about Clark weren't meant to tear down her achievements, but to shine a light on how the media and the public are quick to elevate certain players, while others with similar or even superior skill sets go underappreciated. In Wilson's eyes, it's not just about the basketball, it's about the stories that people choose to tell and the faces they choose to put in the spotlight. The timing of Wilson's comments came when emotions were still raw from the playoff loss. It's one thing to lose a game, but to then see the narrative shift to glorify another player while your team's hard work goes largely unnoticed. That's the kind of frustration that Wilson couldn't keep bottled up. It's as if she was saying, hey, we're out here too, and we're just as good, if not better. So why aren't people paying attention? Her statements were a mix of justified anger and a call to action, pushing people to reconsider how they consume women's sports and whose stories they amplify. Wilson's outspokenness has always been a double-edged sword. While it earns her respect from those who appreciate her honesty, it also invites criticism from those who prefer their athletes to stick to sports. She speaks with the kind of clarity that makes you stop and think, even if you don't agree with her every word. The deeper message Wilson conveyed in her statements is that the WNBA's struggle with ratings isn't just about the quality of the game but also about how narratives are built around its players. She touched on the point that the league's marketing has often failed to highlight the diversity and richness of its talent, instead leaning into storylines that fit a more comfortable mold for broader audiences. Her remarks about Clark weren't so much an attack as they were an invitation for people to see the bigger picture, a picture where race, marketing, and media coverage all play a role in shaping the sport's future. Wilson's commentary also taps into a broader issue that extends beyond the WNBA. The sports world in general has a habit of packaging athletes in a way that fits certain molds, and when a player like Clark comes along, who checks off the next big thing box in a particular way, the media runs with it. Wilson wasn't suggesting that Clark doesn't deserve praise. She was highlighting that players of color often have to work twice as hard to get half as much recognition. It's a tale as old as time, one that persists in every corner of professional sports. Humor might not be the first thing that comes to mind when discussing a serious issue like racial dynamics in sports, but Wilson has a way of blending her sharp wit with her criticism. She's got that dry, almost sarcastic humor that makes you crack a smile even when she's laying down hard truths. It's her way of easing into the uncomfortable, making it digestible without losing the edge of her message. She didn't come out swinging in anger. She approached it like a coach giving a halftime pep talk, stern but with a touch of that I'm right smirk. In this light, Wilson's comments aren't just a critique, but a rallying cry for change. She's challenging not just the fans but the league itself to do better, to tell stories that reflect the diversity of its players, to push past the surface-level narratives, and to dig deeper into what makes the game great. For Wilson, it's not enough to just be great on the court. You also have to fight to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized in a way that's fair and equitable. The implications of Wilson's words stretch far beyond a playoff loss or a single player's rise to fame. It's a call to re-examine the systems that govern how we view and value athletes. Wilson's voice, powerful as it is, echoes the frustrations of many athletes who feel that they're fighting a battle that's only partly about their performance on the court. While Caitlin Clark's name became the focal point of the discussion, it's clear that Wilson's issue wasn't with Clark personally, but with what she represents in the broader conversation about race and representation in sports. Clark's rise to fame is not the problem. The problem is that so many others like Wilson have to fight harder to get the same spotlight. It's a problem of who gets to be the face of the sport and who gets to tell the story. In this context, Wilson's comments are not just about calling out discrepancies. They're about demanding change. She's using her platform to challenge the status quo, to make people uncomfortable in the hopes that discomfort leads to progress. Her words were a reminder that change doesn't come from silence. It comes from speaking out, even when the message isn't easy to hear. For Wilson, this is bigger than just basketball. It's about justice, fairness, and the kind of legacy she wants to leave behind. As the conversation continues, Wilson's influence will likely grow stronger. She's not just a player. She's a voice for those who felt overlooked and underappreciated. And as much as her words were a critique, they were also a kind of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That one day the stories we tell about athletes won't be colored by the things that shouldn't matter like race, but by the things that should like heart, skill, and the pure love of the game. A'ja Wilson's outspoken nature isn't just a part of her personality, it's her calling card. As she navigates the highs and lows of the WNBA landscape, her voice carries weight. Her comments on the ratings issue and the Caitlin Clark situation came at a time when the league was already grappling with its place in the sports world, making her words resonate even deeper. Wilson isn't one to sugarcoat her thoughts or shy away from difficult conversations. Lack of adequate representation and storytelling around women athletes, especially women of color. The league has been home to some of the most exceptional talents, yet it often fights for attention in a crowded sports arena dominated by men's leagues. For Wilson, it's not just about people watching the games. It's about how those games are presented, packaged, and marketed. The WNBA's low ratings, in her view, aren't just a result of disinterest, but a symptom of a much bigger problem: the absence of narratives that resonate with broader audiences. When Wilson brought Caitlin Clark's name into the conversation, she was making a broader statement about the way sports culture in the U.S. tends to elevate certain athletes to stardom, while leaving others in the shadows. It's a formula that's been seen before. When a player who fits the traditional image of a star, often white, charismatic, and marketable, emerges, the media spotlight follows them closely. Clark's undeniable talent and thrilling style of play certainly earned her the attention. But Wilson's point was about the speed and intensity with which that attention was granted, as if the industry was almost waiting for a new face to fill that role. This isn't to say Wilson's comments were just about frustration. They were also a strategic critique. She's a seasoned player who knows how the game is played both on the court and in the public eye. By drawing attention to Clark's rise, Wilson wasn't looking to diminish her accomplishments, but to use the moment to push the conversation forward. She wanted to bring to light the systemic biases that seem to favor certain narratives over others, urging everyone to look at why those biases exist in the first place. Wilson's candor forces fans and critics alike to confront their own biases. Why do we so quickly champion some athletes while others have to prove themselves over and over again, despite their evident skills? The racial undertones in Wilson's comments aren't just speculative. They reflect a lived experience that many black athletes have shared. She's making it clear that for black women in sports, success alone is not enough. They'd also have to navigate a landscape that often undervalues their contributions. This dynamic can be seen throughout sports history, where black athletes have faced obstacles in gaining the same level of recognition and endorsement opportunities as their white counterparts. Wilson's frustration is rooted in a reality that many female athletes of color have faced, not just in basketball but across all sports. It's not the double standard that requires them to work harder for the same acknowledgement, to outshine everyone else just to be seen as equals. She's talking about a systemic issue that's so ingrained in sports culture that most people barely notice it until someone like Wilson spells it out. Wilson's approach to this discussion is both strategic and fearless, a reflection of her character on the court. Her commentary wasn't just an emotional response to a tough playoff exit. It was a calculated attempt to shine a spotlight on an issue that has been ignored for too long. By linking the discussion of race to something as tangible as WNBA ratings and the rise of a player like Clark, Wilson brought a difficult conversation into the mainstream. The complexity of Wilson's argument lies in its subtlety. She wasn't calling for people to dislike Clark or discredit her achievements. Instead, she was asking for a moment of self-reflection, an opportunity to question why the sports media landscape is the way it is. Her comments challenge fans to think beyond the stats and highlight reels, and to question why they gravitate towards certain athletes over others. It's a push to expand the lens through which we view greatness in sports. Wilson's voice has always been one of empowerment, not just for herself, but for her teammates and women in the league at large. Her outspokenness serves as a rallying cry for her peers to speak up as well, to challenge the norms and push for a future where athletes of all backgrounds can share the spotlight equally. She's advocating for a shift in how the WNBA tells its stories, urging the league to take control of its narrative, rather than let the media dictate which players become stars. In many ways, Wilson's call for change isn't just about ratings or individual players. It's about the overall culture of the WNBA and women's sports. She's highlighting the need for a paradigm shift, where the league doesn't wait for the media to create stars, but instead invests in building up all its players. Wilson's stance is that if the WNBA truly wants to grow its audience, it has to start by celebrating its own diversity and amplifying the voices of all its athletes, not just a select few who fit a traditional mold. The undertone of Wilson's critique also touches on the commercial side of the game. Sponsorship deals, endorsements, and marketing campaigns often favor athletes who are deemed more marketable by brands, which in many cases translates to athletes who are white. This is not a problem unique to the WNBA, but a reflection of broader societal issues, where marketability is often linked to racial bias. Wilson's frustration stems from the fact that many incredibly talented black athletes in the league don't get the same level of commercial support, despite their skills and contributions to the game. In pushing this narrative, Wilson isn't just trying to change the game for herself. She's doing it for the next generation of players. She's paving the way for young girls watching at home, especially young black girls, who see her not only as a star player but also as someone who stands up for what she believes in. Wilson's fight is about creating a future where talent is the only currency that matters, where the next generation doesn't have to battle the same biases she's faced. Wilson's impact on this conversation reaches beyond the court. Her ability to articulate these issues in a way that resonates with so many people is what makes her a true leader. She's not afraid to put herself out there, to risk backlash, because she knows the importance of using her platform to initiate change. Her voice cuts through the noise, demanding that people pay attention to the issues at hand rather than sweeping them under the rug. The way Wilson has handled the situation speaks volumes about her leadership style. She's the kind of player who doesn't just lead with her game, but also with her voice. Her willingness to tackle uncomfortable subjects head-on shows a level of courage and commitment that goes beyond just being an athlete. She's playing the long game, looking to transform not just how people view her or the WNBA, but how they perceive women's sports as a whole. As the conversation around her comments continues to evolve, it's clear that Wilson's voice has sparked something much larger. It's not just about one player or one playoff exit. It's about a movement toward greater visibility, respect, and equity in sports. Her words have become a catalyst for discussions that go beyond the WNBA, touching on how society as a whole views women athletes and athletes of color. She's challenging everyone to rethink their assumptions and to open their eyes to the biases that influence their perceptions. She's called for a reckoning with the status quo, and that kind of disruption is exactly what the WNBA needs to push its way into the mainstream consciousness. A'ja Wilson's legacy will be defined not just by her statistics and championship rings, but by her ability to spark change both on and off the court. She's making it clear that she won't settle for mediocrity, that she won't be content until every player in the WNBA gets the recognition they deserve. Her determination to push for progress is what makes her not just a star athlete but a true game changer. The implications of Wilson's comments stretch beyond basketball courts and press rooms. They are a statement on how society often constructs and deconstructs the worth of its athletes based on narrow ideals. She's putting the spotlight on the issue and challenging everyone to broaden their view, to embrace a narrative that includes every player, regardless of how well they fit into preconceived molds. By raising these points, Wilson has ensured that the conversation about race, representation, and media bias in the WNBA won't disappear anytime soon. Her words have become a touchstone for anyone who wants to understand the deeper issues at play in sports. And as more players join this conversation, the potential for real change in how the game is presented and perceived becomes ever more possible. What makes Wilson's stance so powerful is her willingness to dig into uncomfortable truths that others might shy away from, opening up conversations that many consider taboo. She's not just calling out the status quo, she's aiming to dismantle it piece by piece, using her platform to reshape the way we think about athletes and their stories. Wilson's critique of WNBA ratings and the associated racial dynamics points to a larger issue that has plagued women's sports for years: visibility. It's not just that the games themselves are underwatched, but that the coverage they do receive often lacks depth and fails to capture the personalities and narratives that make sports compelling in the first place. When we think about men's sports, we're immediately drawn to the storytelling, the rivalries, the comebacks, the individual player arcs that make the games larger than life. Wilson's frustration is rooted in the fact that the WNBA has the same potential for epic stories, but they aren't getting the same stage. She understands that the media's role in sports is not just to report the scores, but to build myths and create legends. This is where Wilson's pointed comments about Caitlin Clark come into play. She sees the rapid rise of Clark's star as an example of the media's selective storytelling. It's the disparity in who gets to be the face of the league and who doesn't, and why that seems to correlate so strongly with race. In the grand scheme, Wilson's outspoken nature can be seen as a call to revolutionize the way the WNBA markets itself. She's advocating for a league that doesn't just rely on one or two players to carry the narrative, but instead builds a broader tapestry that includes all its stars. She envisions a league where players from all backgrounds are given equal platforms to shine, where a player's marketability isn't predicated on fitting a specific mold, but rather on their skills, charisma, and what they bring to the sport. This challenge goes beyond just the league itself. It's also a call to action for sports journalists, broadcasters, and even fans. Wilson's words serve as a reminder that the power of a sport lies not just in its ability to entertain, but in its capacity to reflect society. The way we talk about athletes, the faces we choose to celebrate, and the stories we amplify all play a role in shaping cultural perceptions. Wilson's push is for everyone involved in the WNBA ecosystem to be more intentional about the stories they tell. Wilson's influence on the discourse also extends to how women's sports are positioned commercially. In a world where major brands and corporations dictate much of the sports industry's momentum, Wilson's remarks shed light on the systemic biases that exist even within sponsorship and endorsement deals. Many companies choose to back athletes who fit a particular image, which often means black athletes face more barriers to securing the same lucrative deals. Wilson's stand is as much about leveling that playing field as it is about raising the visibility of women's basketball. Consider the fact that brands have the power to shape public perception. The athletes they choose to elevate often become the faces of the sport in the public eye. Wilson's critique of this dynamic isn't just a personal frustration, it's a strategic demand for brands to be more inclusive in whom they choose to sponsor and promote. She's challenging these companies to look beyond traditional metrics of marketability and to embrace a more diverse range of athletes who reflect the true spirit and demographics of the league. What makes Wilson's stance even more compelling is her awareness of the business side of basketball. She's not just speaking from a place of emotion. She's using her platform to highlight the economic factors that influence how the game is marketed and consumed. By putting these issues into the spotlight, Wilson is encouraging a deeper understanding of how media narratives are constructed, not just in terms of who gets to be a star, but also in terms of who controls those narratives in the first place. The WNBA itself has been making strides in recent years to boost its visibility and audience engagement, but Wilson's comments serve as a reminder that there is still much work to be done. The league has a golden opportunity to redefine how it markets itself by centering its players' stories that are diverse, dynamic, and filled with the same drama and emotion that make men's sports so compelling. Wilson is pushing the league to be proactive rather than reactive, to create a brand that isn't just about basketball, but about culture, empowerment, and authenticity. One's not interested in half measures or incremental changes. She's calling for a cultural shift, a revolution in the way women's sports are seen and celebrated. Wilson's vision is bold, ambitious, and unapologetically demanding of more from the league, from the fans, from the media, and from the entire sports industry. As A'ja Wilson continues to push the conversation forward, her influence extends beyond the WNBA and into the broader cultural narrative about equality in sports. Wilson's actions have sparked a larger dialogue that challenges the sports industry to confront its own biases and reevaluate how it approaches representation, promotion, and inclusivity. She has transformed from a dominant player on the court into a formidable voice in social activism, where her impact is being felt not just by her peers, but by aspiring athletes and sports fans across the globe. Wilson's leadership in this space isn't accidental, it's strategic and deliberate. Her comments about the discrepancy in attention between athletes like Caitlin Clark and her WNBA peers are not just critiques, but calls to redefine what we view as marketable in sports. She's asking the industry to take a hard look at why certain narratives are prioritized over others, and why the talent of so many black athletes in the league goes underappreciated. It's a challenge to the ingrained practices of sports media, which too often lean on outdated models that fail to recognize the evolving landscape of women's sports. One of the remarkable aspects of Wilson's activism is her ability to channel her frustrations into constructive conversations that invite everyone to be part of the solution. She's not simply venting. She's opening up a dialogue that allows others to join in, to share their experiences, and to push for changes that benefit all athletes. In doing so, she's creating a platform where discussions about race, gender, and equality in sports can happen in an open and honest way. Her approach is inclusive, encouraging not just players but also fans, journalists, and industry leaders to rethink their roles in shaping sports culture. Wilson's stance also highlights the importance of visibility in inspiring the next generation of athletes. She knows that when young girls, especially young girls of color, see someone who looks like them succeeding and speaking out in the WNBA, it sends a powerful message that they too can break barriers. Wilson isn't content with just playing the game. She's rewriting the rules to ensure that every player has a chance to shine. And as the conversation she started grows louder, the world of sports will have no choice but to listen and eventually to change. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content. We thrive on your feedback, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, keep discovering and stay tuned.